Tatiana Ryabinina, Management Consultant and Director at Grow-thru. That will be another very interesting and exciting speech on the challenges that Tatiana faced with her new position in the company when she joined Grow-thru, and the scale of this challenge is enormous. So, and Tatiana is already here. Hello, Tatiana. Hello.
Hi, Max. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. How are you today?
Good. Excited about being here. There's a lot to share. So I hope.
Stronger by sharing. This is our motto of today's conference. I hope you already feel stronger. Okay, so Tatiana, I've already briefly introduced you, and I think it's time to tell everybody about this great story, this challenge that you had with a number of languages and localization process to build in Grow-thru. So please share your screen, and I think we can move forward.
Yeah, so the only caveat is that, thank you, Max. The only caveat is that Grow-thru actually was born as an outcome of this experience at ClassPass, because I was an individual consultant back then, and eventually I ended up teaming up with my former colleague from ClassPass, and we built Grow-thru to achieve what we couldn't have achieved at ClassPass. So
thank you for clarifying that.
Let's dive into it.
Okay, and I will just remind everybody to join Smartcat community, ask the questions there, and we'll make sure to deliver those questions to the chat here in Zoom. Tatiana, enjoy your time with our attendees.
Yeah, enjoy yours. Thank you. So I joined ClassPass in I think late April 2019. But I'll tell you the story about how it started also before I was there. And I'll tell you later in what capacity I joined. So for those of you who don't know what ClassPass is about, it was when I started the world's largest aggregator of fitness and wellness experiences. But it also looks like they have beauty today. So well done, Team ClassPass, keeping on your promises. So eventually, can I move on to the next slide? I'm just, sorry, a bit stuck on here. There we go. So the expansion efforts were like enormous. And as also the leadership team mentioned before, we achieved the unicorn status. This expansion was arguably the fastest they have witnessed. So we went from 4 markets, English speaking, into 28 countries, mostly non-English speaking, in just a year and a half. So how was it even possible, you say? So the actual reasons for expansion, well, the official ones, I would say, was that the ClassPass was positively impacting the world. So it was a good reason to scale and really become a global company. That it has a great business model. Caveat, it changed the business model several times, so it was still nailing it down at that time, and that it has resources to scale, but actually the resources were raised for the expansion specifically. So my personal view is that it was really driven by some investment decisions and the pressure from investors that were looking for IPO eventually, and it just had to scale. So regardless of what it was and what the reason was for expansion, it had to be done. So it was only possible with a scalable solution, and that was an expansion playbook. So essentially, it allowed to replicate the same process when entering any new market. In an ideal world, it would take about a month and a half to enter any new market. But in practice, obviously, there was more preparation to be done, depending on what country we were entering, because sometimes you had to establish operations in the country. But that was roughly the process, and that it changed eventually. But it was the guidelines, and then there were about 10 different functions that were supporting expansions, and they were all expansion stakeholders. You see the list here, and you don't see localization. And you ask, how is it even possible that there was no localization function when it was started? Well, I was asking myself the same question. Funnily enough, the team understood the real the value of localization and the need for it, and they did a lot of preparation and investigation work to understand why we need to invest in localization, because it essentially allows to enter those markets in the first place, because otherwise you can't operate. And then it will increase the value of ClassPass to the users on both sides of the platform, both consumers, the fitness enthusiasts, and fitness studios. And it was also seen as a competitive weapon to weaken the competitors that already had an established presence in all those local markets. So it was all clear and made sense. And the project and engineering teams that was allocated to drive these efforts was kind of the better position function to do that, and because essentially the product was all digital, and it a lot of heavy lifting needed to be done on that side. And it might not look like it from the kind of the outside, but it really had 4 different digital products, even though internally we also called it just one, which is the consumer app. But there was some ClassPass audio workouts and video workouts that were part of the same offering, and they were offered for free, but they were sort of kind of included in the app. And then at the back end, there was a solution for fitness studios that could integrate with this platform. So there's a lot of work to be done here, and obviously it needed to be phased out. So there was a clear path to localization, and the team were very clear about going in phases and really focusing on the most important dimensions to start with. So, well, my personal view is that localization as an industry made it a bit too easy to believe that all you need to support this kind of initiative is really a technical solution that would allow you to bring linguists on it who will work in that translation UI, whatever it is. So eventually the teams were just choosing between different solutions available on the market, and they had a list of criteria that were important, and it all makes a lot of sense. Some observations here that they did point out that it was essential that there was an account manager or project manager that would be part of this offering, that would support the product managers with all the translation management, but also some of the aspects such as support for marketing teams and legal, they were seen as outside the scope of this localization efforts. Also because it was product and engineering team, it just landed on their shoulders, and they couldn't do everything. So it turned out that the whole process was a hell lot more complicated, time-consuming, and challenging for the engineers, the product managers, and they just couldn't So the level of support they received from the TMS provider wasn't enough. It wasn't Smartcat. So, and essentially there was no dedicated manager to look after all those translations. The features that they bought were not really working as expected by the teams. Doesn't mean they were not working at all. But also, it turned out that some of the critical parts of the product and the user experience was still not localizable, and it surfaced during the QA. So, and that was when also the scope of work what started to be really understood a bit more than it was before, and that's why they decided to hire a localization manager full-time. The product team said the person needed to have strong technical expertise because of all those challenges that we're facing. Then the job ad for this position was put together by a marketing team somehow. And I guess they copied it from somewhere else, because I also saw something similar in another company. During the interview that I had with the HR, they said, so the technical expertise wasn't mentioned in that. So the HR told me that transcreation was really a must-have for them, and I had that experience. I'm not necessarily so strong on technical side of things, and the hiring manager was yet to join the company, so he couldn't really introduce me properly to what I was about to do. So that's how the ClassPass ended up hiring a cross-cultural marketing strategist to deal with their translation coordination problems. And that was how I joined. So I had some, other than unrealistic job preview for many reasons, I also had some stretching goals and fairly impossible targets. Because nobody really understood what localization was about. There was no localization expertise on the team, and I was joining as an expert, but I had my own take on localization, which I saw as a strategy more than technical process. So it was a bit of a challenge also for me. So one of the key targets for my first 90 days was reducing the time to market for localization from 2 months to 1. It kind of seemed impossible to ask because nobody had really launched any market in 2 months. Because when I joined, they had just launched in the Netherlands in the first language that wasn't English, was Dutch. And during my first 2 weeks, they were launching in France and Germany. And looking back at the process, how it started when they started translation work, it really was about more 5 months than 2. So when we launched my first market, which was Denmark, it wasn't what it looked like from the list I was given when I started. So it turned out that the estimated time for localization, just the essential bits to get ready for the market launch, required a bit more time than estimated. So engineering needed 2 weeks after receiving the translations to do their work. And then the QA after that would need 2 to 4 weeks to do proper QA. And then you ask, well, how does it, where do you squeeze in a translation here? So it was really impossible to reduce it. But we ended up launching in quite a few markets eventually, and with the average speed of less than a month and a half for every new market. So the list of languages I had when I joined wasn't nearly close to what we ended up doing. So this was my, so as I speak, I'll walk you through my job description. So what kind of I was trying to achieve those things that I was tasked with, but it turned out to be kind of either impossible or just didn't make sense. So I was supposed to oversee the localization of product and mobile content, um, but that you will find out soon enough what it was about, really. So it was, instead of 13 languages, we did actually have 14, I guess. And then we ended up localizing for markets that never launched. Because as we, were scaling, the competitive situation was changing, and we had to react very quickly. So it was a lot of moving, like postponing some work, resuming, doing many languages in parallel. So it was continuously overlapping. They were all at different stages of readiness. So kind of getting them ready on time was very challenging, also considering that like these 2 months were really very, very stretched as a goal. But we did manage it also with the first languages that were get ready. So it was less than 2 months and from the moment that we knew we were entering Denmark until the moment that we launched. So there were no delays, but obviously it was a hell of a challenge, to be honest. And at some point, because of all those overlapping priorities and that kept changing, we ended up being able to launch in one new market per week. And some of those were also English speaking. So essentially we had 5 weeks when we were entering 5 new countries. So that was a crazy speed, and I don't know how we managed that, because I think it was the great team that we had. But honestly, it was very difficult to really think things through, and we didn't have enough market research to make our decisions, and it was just about just doing it and then figuring out later what it was, what needed to change. So as I said, the scope of work kept changing, and to kind of make things easier also and clearer, I decided that we were never going to localize audio and video workouts. I just imagine how it's done. Like, what do you do? Subtitles? You can't really. So probably the most effective solution is just shooting them, like recording them from scratch for every new market. But is it really worth it? Because that was part of the offering. It was free. So investing in things like that was just out of the question. So there was, what you see on the left was a kind of scope of work for localization as it was initially thought. And eventually I ended up dealing with what was outside the scope for product and engineering localization efforts. So it was marketing, CX, partnership communications, some social media ads and things like that. But also it turned out that there were many more stakeholders that needed support from localization. And the scope of work for me as a localization team of one was a lot more than it was for product. And we also ended up doing some of consulting work for internal stakeholders. That really is not something that you think a localization manager would do. But everyone needed us, and we were there. So if I knew from the beginning who the stakeholders were, because I was kind of misguided a little bit, because okay, it's product and mobile, but it really wasn't just that. So if I knew who were the stakeholders and what were their needs for localization, what content they needed, where it all lived, I would have certainly approached it differently. But there wasn't time for it, and every day, I'm not kidding, every day there was someone new who would reach out to me and ask for something related to translation because also as we were expanding, the organization was growing, and like there was so many new starters, and like they would all join to support the international expansion, and they all needed translation in one way or another. So the challenge was that we we didn't really have integrations. The TMS solution didn't have integrations with all those tools that these different teams were using. And it was an extremely manual process for everyone involved. Imagine like 300 people from 20 functions, because those essentially were my stakeholders, as it turned out. They were all doing copying and pasting every single day. So how much does it cost? So really, when if you're just starting, start with this. Understand who are the people that need content and how they work, where all that content lives, what they do with it, when they need it, all of it. Like, it's really, really important. It will save you from failure. So, how many functions, business functions, do you think should be involved and feel accountable for localizing one email? Not 7, I guess, but this is what it was. It was literally, we had 7 different business functions that were looking into just one email and trying to figure out what to do with it. And this is what I inherited. So I ended up being the owner of 126 US-centric consumer emails that all needed coding before they could be turned into something localizable. So I ended up just doing like coding, copying, pasting, uploading, downloading, clicking and ticking for just days in a row, because emails, like support for marketing, just was outside the scope. So there were some questionable practices also being introduced by people who had no experience, but they all had, doing their best to get it right. So who can blame them? So one day I had someone who asked me, well, why our ads are performing better than English than in other languages? What's wrong with translation? But there were many reasons why, like, just translation didn't work for us, and it wasn't just about that, because localization is more about, it's a strategy, it's about being locally relevant, it's about understanding your audience and how you reach out to them. And translation is just, it's not even always part of localization. So we were targeting expats, and like it was, you say, well, do they even need this content to be localized? And we did run ads like in English as well. So really comparing translated versus non-translated was a bit of like not so intuitive, and like, can you really compare it? They are just different audiences. So what the challenge I faced was really about what localization meant for ClassPass, because for me it's a strategy. For the product and engineering, it was ability to translate copy back in 2018, but then it turned out into being the adaptation of product to meet the language, cultural, and other requirements of a specific market. So it also kept changing for them. For brand, it was a local brand, whatever it means. But for the expansion, the team leading the expansion efforts, it was just like a list of dimensions that needed to be considered that impacted pretty much, the entire expansion operation. But what we didn't know is like how to translate those dimensions into a proper strategy. In a sense, well, I have strategic background, but can I really drive it? Is if it impacts just the entire company. But when I was hired to, manage, not even manage, coordinate translation. So I was a bit in a tricky position. I knew that it was a big challenge, but At the same time, I wasn't hired for that, so it was a bit of a struggle. But we did manage to get us closer to what localization should be achieving. And so at some point, one of the teams, it was conversion marketing, they realized that there was a key page that wasn't performing. Like, just they couldn't understand what was wrong with it, why people were not, signing up, because we were offering such a great deal. Sign up, so save up to 70% off drop-in rates. But as we realized, so I worked with an amazing German copywriter on my team. So as she led us to understand that value proposition really didn't have a lot of value to our target customers in Germany, because they were not after discounts. And then the concept itself of drop-in rates it didn't exist in Germany. So, and we had it translated into like something that would be closer to it, but it just didn't make sense. So we had to rewrite it, and we just tweaked like a couple of lines really with an investment of £100, and that boosted our click-through rate on that key landing page by 126%. So well done. We used those data also to pitch for more resources to support localization versus just translation. Well, it turned out to be helpful as well. So if you need to pitch for more resources, do something like that. So other objectives from my job ad was working closely with marketing, product, and country managers to ensure global launch readiness. The challenge here is that there were other teams who were ensuring global launch readiness, and their work wasn't necessarily visible, and somehow they ended up being overlooked. So I ended up seeing this. So we had product engineering who needed translations to be done as soon as possible, because you saw the timelines that they were having. So there was the risk of releasing the app, in a not localized, or also if you don't do translation properly, then the QA would flag issues, and then I'm kind of translating those missing bits was also a challenge. So it was important to get it not just quickly, but also right. But at the same time, we had on the B2B side of things, we had other teams who were enabling the launch without necessarily knowing what was relevant for the market, and they were also struggling. Like, they didn't have any integrations with their tools, and their processes were extremely manual, and they had lots of content, and it was all like mission critical, because they had to their processes were interdependent. So if we didn't deliver translation on time, it would mean that they just had to wait and then crunch everything in just a few weeks instead of the 4 that they were given, because they also had their own timelines, and I wasn't aware of that when I joined. So because I only knew it's product and marketing, so it was a bit of a challenge, and it took us a while to figure out how to go about that. But to be honest, it was more of an operations management problem rather than anything to do with localization as such. So what we did is just, whoever needs translations first, get them first. So those, launch teams and onboarding teams that were looking after the partnerships, they became our top priority and not the product. And then when those, workflows are already established and they don't take into account the localization needs, localization as a function really has like not a lot of influence. to be able to change that, it just becomes very, very complex. And really making improvements is a lot of work. So think carefully about how you establish workflows in the first place, because then changing can be a nightmare. One of the product managers once asked me, well, can't we just onboard more translators to speed up the process? And I was already managing about 50 translators, and more translators meant more work for me to look after them, but also meant that I would have less time to really focus on improvements. And there were teams that just continuously copying and pasting, and like I just couldn't ignore them. So I kept thinking about what can be done better so that they don't have to do all that copying and pasting continuously. So a bit of a trade-off. It's not just about getting it translated, but also making sure that you don't do any extra work in the meantime and just don't block everyone else. Implementing ongoing quality assurance system. Well, you saw the timelines, and you saw I just possibly it's not as a team of one. It wasn't something that I could even think about doing, because it also meant that I would essentially need to replicate all the processes that the product QA team was already relying on, and it didn't make a lot of sense. And as someone who firmly believes that prevention is better than cure, I just thought we'll skip it. And I focused on making sure that we had more context provided to translators so that we prevent the issues from happening. And well, it worked for us, but it was a lot of copying and pasting from me, because our content just didn't. The TMS solution with all the integrations that were supposed to be there, they were just not working, and the context wasn't pulling in. So just it was about providing more screenshots and really passing on the information about what we were translating and what was coming, so that the linguists had a better idea of what they were doing, really, so that we had fewer issues. Create, manage, and maintain glossaries and style guides. This is a very trivial thing, and when I saw it on the job ad, that kind of told me that's kind of a bit of a junior role for me, but I took it anyway because I'm just excited about multi-sided platforms. So here it was a challenge that I inherited those glossaries and from before. Somebody else already created them, so I couldn't really build them or change them too much. But also we had the CX team whose translation needs were not supported by localization as a function, because they relied on AI-powered machine translation solution platform, whatever it was. So they had their own glossaries and their own TMs that were not just working. So we ended up having things like don't be a foreigner instead of don't be a stranger, that were continuously communicated to our international customers. And bicycle day was supposed to mean your monthly membership renewal date in Dutch. So, and how do you fix that? So we started looking into it when we estimated what it would cost us to review those translation memories. 30,000 pounds. And it's no way, it's not happening. So instead, I teamed up with a copywriter and also a translator, to develop some guidelines that would help the teams to write in a way that is machine translation friendly, because cycle date is really not so intuitive. So, but also I kind of acted as a negotiator between the CX team and that AI translation vendor to get them review those TMs and retrain those algorithms for free, because it was just, it wasn't our team's fault that it wasn't working for them. Work closely and maintain relationships with translators and vendors. That was the easiest part and the most rewarding. So if anyone who was there for me is watching, thanks a lot for being awesome. And that was like not just maintaining the relationship, but really investing in those relationships with translators was my top one priority, because we were relying on these guys to communicate on our behalf, and like without really any support, without direction, because I couldn't direct them because I didn't know what we were doing exactly. I was just executing, and really making sure that they have everything they need to feel empowered and just be there for us was something that I've always deeply cared about, but like in that times even more. And I really had like support of an amazing team of translators, and that was really critical for success. Without them, nothing would have been possible. So thanks a lot, guys. And let's get to takeaways. So I wanted to leave a bit more time for questions. I do have many other slides if you want to enjoy, but we will get back to any of the questions that you want to ask. So I don't have like, actionable takeaways, but what I want you to take away from it is just really ask yourself what you're doing. And it's always taken for granted that, we need localization, we need to do it because it will enable us to enter new market, blah, blah, blah. But what do you really mean by it? What is localization? Because it can mean anything to anyone. And it's strategy for me. It's a translation of copy for the product team. How do we work together? Like, what are we really achieving with this? Why do we need it? Where are we heading? And also, like, at what cost? Because it's really, you can localize anything, but how much you should be investing. We really didn't have like a well-defined budget for all our localization needs, and I owned the budget. I couldn't just throw it away. So really having more clarity about how do you go, like how will localization support your growth, and translating it into numbers is critical. But also having someone who really drives it holistically, not just the translation bit of things, but really getting everyone's buy-in. Because when you start entering new markets, you become an international company, and it's more about just how you operate as an international organization. Like that is the biggest challenge. Localization is just it. If you see it as a strategy that supports all your decisions that are related to entering new markets and operating in new markets, communicating with the customers, as it really should be, in my view. If you see it that way, then you start to understand that you really need to make sure that all your processes will need to change. And changing them on the fly is impossible. Like, as we saw, like, it was a total nightmare, because there was so if you are an established company and you have like many functions within it, the ways they work, the ways they work together, the ways that they do their work are just, they will have to change as well. And to be able to support them properly, you need a proper localization strategy. You just cannot plug in, any technical solution into it. So on the technical side of things, it's very easy nowadays, but it's more of a managerial problem if you just don't think beyond translation. And there are many more stakeholders than you can possibly imagine in all this localization process. And really understanding who they are, what they need, who owns what, who owns localizable content versus who owns localized content. I ended up owning everything, but how do you manage a localization project when you're the sponsor, the owner, and you also execute? It's kind of, it can become very, very, it can put a lot of strain, not just on the localization team, but also on everyone who is dealing with it and everyone involved. So more than, there are more questions than to be answered, and it might seem that need answers to. So these are my learnings. I hope you learned something from it as well. So shall we?
I believe, yeah, our attendees definitely learned something, and I saw the messages in chat, and there are people appreciating you sharing this great experience and challenges you faced. Thank you very much. And thank you for having these motivating pictures and background of your slides. It keeps reminding me of morning exercises. I should do them more often than I do now. Thank you very much. So
Yeah.
we have 7 minutes to answer the questions, and let me help you with that. So there is a question from Renata Fernandez. Tatiana, are all classes free or is there a premium plan for ClassPass?
So the audio and video workouts that we did you guys were supposed to be free, but now you sign up with a free trial. Well, I don't know now because I'm not really there, but you would join ClassPass with a free trial, so you can really explore it and see if it works for you. But then it's a paid membership with different plans. But there was because the actual product is not the digital product; it is the supply. So, and this, studio owners, they need to be paid for what they offer. So it can never be free. But digital, I don't know. You can do it, I guess, for free, but it's not what ClassPass is doing, I guess.
Okay, thank you for answering. And the question from Anna Rosna Chadala, I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrongly. The process you're describing from management point of view is impossible. Were you also working remote at the time? Have you raised the misinformation with the management? It constitutes a great lesson for localization managers and project managers for all industries.
Yeah, well, so
Mission impossible.
what I didn't tell you is that I was working across 14 time zones. So it it was more challenging than you think it was. So
We can
I,
expect.
I had the engineering team in Singapore and the product team in San Francisco. Although on the job it was the time difference was just with headquarters in New York. But I was based in London. My manager was in Barcelona. His manager was eventually in New York. It was, we are all working remotely and everyone really had a challenge. And it wasn't just me struggling with it. It was also everyone else who needed to rely on a function that wasn't close by. So I did raise those questions. I asked for, for a team, and I had one team member extra on top of me, and she joined when it just started to slow down really. But she was the best. best teammate I could ever have. So with her being there, we really, had a bit of a bandwidth to think about how we can do it better. But before, it was really impossible. It's super frustrating. But I also had the support of the entire team and my my best teammate with whom I am now, doing things at Grow-thru. But really, like, raising these questions, it can be difficult and can, result in some um, tensions. But I was voicing it, and but what I really gained from it was the support of, everyone, even if it didn't result in, me growing, having a bigger team, but at least we managed to pull it through with this collective efforts.
So if you guys hearing someone telling you that they doing something impossible, encourage them to listen presentation by Tatiana. I think that they will change their mind. Okay, and we have questions from Smartcat community. By the way, guys, thank you for joining us at community and asking your questions. So the question from Yulia Burmistrova: what are the main soft skill challenges when it comes to starting out as a localization manager?
Oh, good question. Plenty. So you need to be able to really communicate with people who have different opinions, who have different views, and like it, you really have to, adapt to the way they think, the way they view localization, which might not, align with yours. But also being keeping calm and staying positive, because otherwise, localization is a highly cross-functional, you know, uh, initiative, and then you need to be able to work cross-functionally, and then everything you do has an impact on everyone else. And you need to be the bridge, really, and like be able to also bond people together, and being able to delegate, like managing up, is critical, because then you can't do everything on your own. And it's not just about, you, it's a team effort. So if you can delegate up, you have better position than anyone else.
And be able to use this ability of 15 minutes between meetings to have a quick snap and then return back refreshed, right? Someone is asking, Katrin is asking, when did you sleep, Tatiana? And another question from Katrin, more serious, if you had to do it all over again, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently, strategically or otherwise? Tatiana, you just have 1 minute to answer this question and we'll have to wrap up.
Everything, I would do it everything differently. But I would start with really identifying the stakeholders and like understanding what they think localization is about, how it will impact their processes. Really, just survey the entire company, ask them, okay, we are doing this. What do you need? What content do you have? How does the translation process would integrate with you? Why do you need this content? Why it matters? Uh, what if it doesn't? You don't get translations. What happens? Really understanding the impact of localization, translation, whatever it means, and really understanding everyone's perspective on that and how it relates, how it impacts their work. Start with that, analyze it, design processes around that. Don't choose any translation solution yet. So I would start with that.
Tatiana, thank you very much for going through all of these challenges, having these amazing achievements, and sharing this experience with us. It is wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here.
Great, and I encourage you to stay if you have time and to listen to other speakers and our panel discussions.